Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from 2/3 of the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm John Kennedy.
And I am Peter Walsh.
And today we are looking at Jesus' multiplication of the loaves, and our own miracle that we will perform for you is a multiplication of words. So get ready. Here we go. This is John chapter 6, verses 1 through 21, and this is for Proper 12 on July 26 of 2024. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him, because he saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place. So they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, got into a boat, and started across the lake to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The lake became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the lake and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land towards which they were going. Okay, where do we begin?
Yeah, okay, thanks, John. Let me start, as you would guess I probably would, with some big picture context here about why we have this piece of Scripture now. As most of you know, this is the only of the miracle stories, so-called miracle stories, that is in all 4 of the Gospels. And then John's Gospel is the only one that gives a long explanation for that, what the miracle is. And we are in John chapter 6, which is, of course, the Bread of Life discourse, and the discourse we're going to get for the next 5 weeks. Which interrupts the flow of the Markan drama, Jesus drama as unfolded by Mark, and just a little excursus on that. So, as most people who are watching our podcast know, that in the lectionary tradition that we're a part of, the writer of John does not have his or maybe her own year, a dedicated year, and so John shows up very, very heavily in the Christmas period, and then in Lent and Easter, and this 5 weeks. This is the 5 weeks out of ordinary time that is really dedicated to John in this discourse on bread, on the bread of life. And in the discourse, the purpose of the bread of life discourse that we're going to see here is to the identity of John, because that's the purpose of all of John's writing, is who is this guy?
The identity of Jesus?
The identity of Jesus, yeah. I mean, that is really, and that's the primary thing. And the secondary thing is going to be all these other allusions that look backward into the Hebrew Bible and then look forward to the Eucharist.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, the whole point of John's Gospel is who is Jesus.
Yeah.
And as you said, we also have going on here allusions to the Old Testament, which of course help elucidate who Jesus is. It sets Jesus up. I mean, Jesus is of course somebody who makes exactly zero sense apart from the context of the Old Testament. He's not some abstract, Savior Messiah. He is the Jewish Messiah. And when you have that context, it makes, all the sense in the world in a way, although profound mystery obviously remains, which, I think is especially present in the walking on the water. But perhaps we could just say a little bit about the Old Testament allusions in this passage, or did you have something else?
No. I want to say yeah and hurrah to what you just said. I think that one of the things that I've learned the most in coming on 150 podcasts now is just the importance of seeing Jesus with Hebrew eyes.
Yeah.
For those of you who are podcast fans of other podcasts, Chad Bird has a wonderful podcast on seeing the gospel with Hebrew eyes, and I think that to begin to see the gospel with Hebrew eyes, we begin to understand what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
As you said, this guy didn't drop out of the blue and have all this stuff and say, I'm the man.
Mm-hmm.
I can't just see I'm the man. I am the man. It is really, everything about his life is rooted deeply in his Hebrew tradition, in his Jewishness, and in the revelation to the Hebrew people, and not only looking backwards and fulfilling that, but looking forward to a whole new creation.
That's true.
And some of that is being played out here, the looking back and the looking forwardness of things.
Most definitely. Yeah. I guess zooming out for a moment, but still staying with what you're saying, we have the word signs appearing in this passage twice. Once in reference to the signs he had been doing for the sick before the passage for today, and then later, verse 14, when the people saw the sign that he had done, which is, of course, the multiplication of the loaves and the fish. And we've talked a fair amount on the pod about what signs means in John. Signs are taken to be precisely signs of a new creation that is building and that sort of bursts out of the tomb, right? Jesus is the new creation in a way, and the new creation properly begins with his resurrection, but the signs are signposts towards it. And scholars count the number of signs in John in different ways, but commonly it's thought that there are 7 leading up to the crucifixion, and then the Passion event as a totality, crucifixion and resurrection are perhaps the 8th sign, or the first sign of a new creation, the 8th day being also the beginning of a new week, that sort of thing. But anyway, so we have a sign here, and the sign is echoing what goes on in the Exodus.
Right.
It's sort of in reverse order here because it's echoing 2 moments in the life of Moses and the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. In the sequence it appears in John, it's first of all the multiplication echoing, of course, the manna descending from heaven, this miraculous food appearing to feed the people when they had nothing to eat, very much like the people in this story. And then secondly, Jesus is walking on the water echoes the parting of the Red Sea. So the sequence is flipped, but those are clearly the references here. And so Jesus and John, as the teller of these stories, is both playing on and honoring these Old Testament foundations, but also kind of surpassing them in a way, because what Jesus is doing is greater, I would say, than what Moses did.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, to everything you're saying on that. I think that one of this is back to you can't understand it unless you understand what happened beforehand. And we certainly get Jesus as Moses-like, and Moses is the primary. If you had to pick out one primary person in the Hebrew Scriptures, it would be Moses. Moses, the lawgiver, and it is through the Red Sea, the Reedy Sea, that the 12 tribes become one nation, become the people of Israel, and Moses is the intermediary of that event and of the formative event. And so I think that what we get here is all of this Moses-like typology, and that's where we get into the prophet and the question of Christology, the who is Jesusness, which is really what the signs are about. So we do have in the Synoptic Gospels all these miracles, and these are deeds of power that demonstrate the who Jesus isness. But in John's Gospel, the deeds of power themselves don't just demonstrate; they are the doorway to this deeper understanding, theological and spiritual understanding that John is wishing to convey, that comes after these signs. So it's like, so we have the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 followed by the discourse on living bread.
Yeah.
But yes, and I don't know if you want to launch into the prophet. Who's the prophet? Because that's a major piece of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the language of prophet is interesting, right? Because it's not exactly synonymous with Messiah, but it seems to be functioning as a synonym here, just because of how the people say, this is the prophet. And then Jesus realizes to him, he's sort of thinking to himself, they're going to come and try to make me king, and king is obviously Messiah. So honestly, I don't have too much to say about the differences.
Oh, okay. So I'm really wound up
so
about this. So thank you, everybody, for letting me be wound up. I'm wound up about this one.
Go for it.
You know how there's some little thing that catches you?
Yeah.
This is like the beheading of John. I got wound up about that weird stuff there, too. But anyway, thank you for bringing that up. Yes, this is something I would like to launch into a little bit, the differences around prophet, the differences around Messiah, and the differences around king. During the Judaic world that Jesus was raised in, there were many different opinions about each of these so-called titles of people and their potential impact and their comingness to the Hebrew people. And I just want to start in on the prophet for a second. So that all goes back to Moses, because in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses says that God will raise up another prophet like Moses. And then the actual Torah, the end of the book of Deuteronomy, which is the end of the Torah proper, the 5 books of Moses, ends with the statement that as of yet, this prophet has not yet been raised up. So to be the prophet is to be the Moses person. And we see this in the beginning of John's Gospel when the Pharisees send their people to John the Baptist on the shores. And this is verse 19 in chapter 1. This is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah." And they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." They said to him, "Who are you? Let us have an answer for those who sent us." So what we have here is something that we don't play up much in our scriptures, which is the prophet. And so here Jesus is saying, the scriptures are saying, yes, he is the prophet. And ironically, where these guys in the feeding of the 5,000, you get this question of prophet and Messiah and king. And Moses also, they treat a little bit like king, even though he wasn't a king because he was a leader. And ironically, the crowd is right, but they're not right in the way Jesus wants to interpret, are you the prophet? Are you the king? Are you the Messiah? But there's no doubt, because the other passage from Elisha is in here too, that Jesus, a major portion of Jesus is that he is a prophet.
Yeah. Thank you for elucidating that. I really loved hearing that, and it sort of brought together some things that I knew but had not been sort of gathered together into this, I think, very important insight about just who John is saying Jesus is and just what kind of Messiah he is. Really, I think really compelling, again, to see this all with Hebrew eyes, to see Jesus as the long-awaited hope that had been promised, the answer to everything that the people of God had been waiting for.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, this is the sort of thing that we always talk about: is this? How does the crowd respond? So we have in the other Gospels, we have feedings of 5,000s in the Synopticals. We have feedings of the 4,000 in some of the Gospels. So here we have attestation of something happened, but only in John do we have the last piece of that, where it says that when the people saw the sign that had been done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." And when Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. And so we get this prophet, this prophet and king and Messiah all wrapped together. And that's what supercharges the crowd. So it's not just that he's feeding him food like, oh my gosh, this is a fantastic handout.
Much more than that.
He is supercharging them and he clearly begins to see that this is dangerous.
Yeah. So this leads me to something else I want to say. It's common for interpreters of this passage, particularly preachers on this passage, maybe in the last 100 years or so, to say what's really going on is that Jesus inspired the crowd to be generous, and they all shared what they already had, and there's no miracle here. Given what we're just talking about here, I don't think that interpretation holds up very well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, and sorry for my slow motion hitting the head here. For sure, the tail end of that, trying to take the supernatural out of the miracle, and that when I was in seminary, which now seems a long time ago, certainly the historic Jesus movement was still going. Maybe the wave was just cresting and starting to go down a little bit, maybe. And they were voting on whether or not these were the words of Jesus and were these miracles.
Different colored beads.
And that this was a miracle of sharing. Well, if this is a miracle of sharing, it certainly would not inspire them to make him king.
Right,
and in fact, in the miracle of sharing, the hero is the little boy who had 5 barley loaves and shared his 2 little fish, which apparently are very particular types of little fish, kind of like Sea of Galilee sardines that are smoked, and they're tiny, and you stick them in the sauce and just gnaw on them. I mean, but it's the boy who's the hero of that version.
Yeah, that doesn't supercharge the crowd.
It doesn't work. You're either going to buy this or you're not.
There's, of course, so much to say here. Just maybe quickly noting that Jesus understands his messiahship quite differently from the crowd, and so he withdraws, and that's a very important theme. And I just think it's impressive that Jesus, at various moments, you get this throughout John, when the crowd is most with him, when his stock is highest, when he could just sort of passively accept the elevation, the exaltation that is coming to him, he kind of breaks it off.
Yeah.
He turns down the heat, or later in John we'll see that he actually offends the crowd. When they're so jazzed about him, he starts talking about, we'll talk about this in the future weeks, but what he says about eating his flesh and drinking his blood is anathema according to Jewish law. You do not eat the blood of an animal, never mind of a person, flesh or blood of a person. Yeah. So the crowd's like, what's going on here? And they kind of
amen to that. I think what we have here is really the pinnacle moment of Jesus's Galilean ministry, where the crowd is so into him, they want to make him king. And again, we get into, there's more than one versions here. We have 5,000 in John's gospel, but in some of the other gospels, we get 5,000 men, not including women and children, which is an allusion to the Passover Exodus events, where only the men are counted. So John's kind of kind us on the head. But suppose any of those numbers have any reality. If Elizabeth were here, she would be whacking her head, saying, "Oh my gosh, Peter, these numbers don't have reality." But anyway, Lisa, gosh, I hope I haven't offended Elizabeth by saying something she wouldn't say. So if that's not true, that's not true. But I'll just say that maybe that would be true. Some might think such a thing. But if the numbers really were 5,000 or thousands of men and then some women and then some children, this is the mega church moment for Jesus. Right. And as you say, he's about to smash the mega church moment and drive them all away. Yeah. I mean, he's really, this is the pinnacle of his Galilean ministry, if you want to see it as the pinnacle of his popularity. Yeah. Is right here.
Yeah. Super, super interesting. And part of, I think, what makes Jesus so compelling. So we're talking about Jesus as prophet and as king, and in Christian theology, there's a tradition of Jesus' threefold office: a prophet, priest, and king. And we also have the priestly element here because all of chapter 6 is John's Eucharistic moment, if you will, Eucharistic episode, because the Last Supper in John doesn't have the Eucharistic moment. It just has the foot washing and a long discourse. So this is where it happens. So this is Jesus actually being priest here. Do you want to launch into that?
I want to say that when I was trying to get out prophet, Messiah and King. I kept wanting to say priest too. I had to keep holding my tongue, and then you did it, and then you did it beautifully with saying this is the Eucharista moment. I mean, we're in some sense looking forward. If we're looking back to all that Moses stuff, now we're looking forward to Jesus as priest and Eucharist, the bread of life, the life of the that is gifted to the life of the church, the Jesus life of the church, and yes to all of that. You know, at some level, if you took all of Jesus's teachings and even the Hebrew Scriptures and you just started to boil it down, there's a lot of meals here. And the meal is a sacred event and a revelatory event, all of these meals. And so this is, in some sense, Jesus's revelatory event as the sacred meal. And he does change that revelatory event. The manna in the desert is now manna for the soul, but we're coming to that.
Right.
We're still eating bread. He's still feeding real people who are really hungry.
Yeah.
This is not a psychological thing.
Yeah.
In this story.
Even the sort of what obviously many centuries later, Dom Gregory Dix, the great liturgical writer of last century, would describe as the fourfold action of the Eucharist. And he's taking the loaves, giving thanks or blessing, and then breaking's implied here. But that definitely is going on, distributing. So this is absolutely a Eucharistic meal, and the language is such as we find in our Eucharistic prayers. You know, Jesus took the bread, and when he had given thanks, you know. So you even get that, yes, and I love the Dom Gregory Dix, maybe the only thing I can remember from seminary, Dom Gregory Dix, and the fourfold actions of the Eucharist, and apparently the way the Greek word works with the bread. So this bread is barley loaves. These are like muffins. This isn't like a loaf of bread. And barley was what was fed to the animals. This is the bread of the poor. This is the lowest bread. And so the fragments that are left over are just the same word that is used for fragments in the breaking of bread in the Eucharist. Right, yes.
And so you're absolutely right about this, the Eucharist overtones here. And I might also just add, since we're discussing how this breaking the bread and the 12 baskets are left over, and that travelers, pilgrims, carried a basket of food, and that's where they carried the dry fish, and where they would carry these muffins. And so when there's 12 baskets, I always thought of this as 12 enormous baskets left on a seaside. It's not necessarily true. This could be 12 baskets that could feed, of course, the 12 disciples. It could be the 12 leftoverness that feeds the 12 tribes of Israel, the people of Israel, the gathering. This all, again, has all sorts of biblical allusions about God feeding. Now, we need to
walking on the water.
We need to walk on water here.
Right.
Okay, so John, walk on water.
I'm just going to go right to what I find to be sort of the lightning bolt in the middle of it, which is as it's translated here, it is I. Yeah. But Jesus is saying, I am. This is the Greek ego eimi. He says it elsewhere in John, perhaps most significantly when he says to the Pharisees and the crowd who's sort of opposed to him a little bit later in chapter 8, before Abraham was, I am.
Yeah.
Right? This is a very clear statement of his divine identity, and his action here, walking on the water, is also a demonstration of that identity.
Yeah, 100%. That is the key. You nailed it. We don't have a lot of time because Rob's trying to get us to wrap up to bring the boat to shore immediately, as happened in this story. But we don't have Jesus in that way. So the boat is we're still at sea. You're absolutely right. This is about the word. This is the ego eimi issue here, or not issue. You know, that's what this is about. And interestingly, if you go back to the Hebrew Scripture allusions to this, there are allusions in places where Yahweh is, Yahweh basically walks on the sea. Yeah. And so Jesus is basically saying, I'm Yahweh here. And also with the, tied right in with the fear notness of things.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, of course, I think the waters, and particularly stormy waters, were a very potent symbol in the ancient Near Eastern world of all that is uncontrollable in nature, all that human beings have no power over, and that has profound power over human beings to disrupt our lives, our plans, our it's very often end our lives, right? And so only God in the Hebrew imagination would have power over the elements, and these watery elements in this particular way. And so Jesus likewise shares in that power over these elements. The storm is nothing to him.
Yeah. And that, you're absolutely right about the question of chaos and the whole the water as chaos, which is really interesting, just given how much money is spent on houses on seashores. This would have not been something that the Hebrew people were looking to do, because the seas were places of fright, not places to look at and think how beautiful they are. And I would just say, in the modern American interpretation of this, going back to my college days, it was the Gibson Girl around 1910, when the seashore became a stylish place to be and changed Americans' attitude about ocean fronts. Anyway, that's just a little freebie apropos of nothing to do with this scripture. Exactly. Anyway, the other thing I think that is particularly interesting about this is just, John really pares the story down. In Matthew's gospel, we have Peter getting out of the boat and walking to. Yeah. And also, just because I think in the final moments here, it's really fun for us to throw in back to the historic Jesus look of, Jesus didn't really walk on water.
Sandbar?
The sandbar. That there was this sandbar. Yeah. These guys
were there other
There's one other. Yeah, there's one other. Okay,
Yeah.
So the sandbar. The other one is that if you take a look in John 21, when my favorite passage, when Jesus is cooking the meal on the beach, and it says that he's on the sea, it implies he's on the seashore. It's the same phrase here. And so some interpreters have said, well, Jesus is walking along the edge, because you can walk along the edge, and the disciples were so scared of the seas that they were honing the edge, and they saw him walking along the edge.
Wow.
But it doesn't fit the story.
No.
They wouldn't have been afraid. Peter wouldn't have said, get out of the boat and can I walk to you? I mean, if he's walking
and this
the
is
shore.
no revelation of divine identity in that case. To that, so Jesus says, I am, and then again it's translated, do not be afraid, but he actually just says 4 words here. I am, no fear.
Man, Rob's got to get a T-shirt that says "I am no fear" on it.
Yeah.
Rob. That okay?
Yeah.
I don't know that. I love that.
Yeah.
I think we can dock the boat with that one.
Okay.
That's so good.
Yeah.
That's not followable.
All right.
That's beautiful. Well done, John.
Thank you. Yeah, we've just docked our boat. Skipper Rob is leading us off. He's been anxiously trying to get us off the boat for a while, and he's finally succeeded. So thanks for riding along with us. And as always, like, comment, subscribe. Leave us, if not a comment, give us a call on the Warm Line, and we look forward to being with you next time. Peace be with you.